There isn't anything I can say that isn't already being discussed by fans, so I'm just going to put my own spin on it. I'll start by saying that when I initially heard the news, I tried to remain neutral. On the one hand, we're getting to see movies that I thought we'd never get a chance to see. George Lucas was so firm that there would never be any future films, and that he instead wanted to see the franchise grow on television. To hear him announce that not only will there be more films, but that he won't be involved, for the most part, is surprising given that he's got a history of wanting to have complete control over his films. For years, the fan community has griped and complained about all the changes Lucas kept making to the original trilogy, going as far as to claim that he raped their childhoods. And I think that's going a little too far. I'm sure I'm not the first to point out that while the man developed Jar Jar Binks, he also wrote May the Force Be With You. At the same time, whenever the films are released in a new format, whether it be DVD, Blu-ray, or whatever new format the future holds, fans have angrily demanded with little success that the original films be released intact. The closest thing they got were less than impressive Laserdisc transfers that were included as bonus features on separate DVD releases, and that wasn't enough to please them. With Disney taking over the Lucasfilm mantle, that could very well change, although there's a lot of confusion as to who holds ownership over the original films. I've heard that for some reason 20th Century Fox officially owns the rights to the original unaltered version of A New Hope, but then I thought Lucas owned all of his films. And besides, many fans would agree that Lucas tampered with that film the most, so you would think he held ownership over all of them. I never minded the alterations to the original films. Of course, it was awesome to be able to see them in theaters for the first time in 1997, and at that age, seeing all the new changes was an extra incentive to see them again. Since then, I found the additional material distracting, maybe even unnecessary. But I did buy the Blu-rays purely for the movies themselves, and even with all of Lucas's tampering, the movies are as good now in HD as they were on VHS when I was a kid. I know a lot of people hated the prequel trilogy, and this is where I think a lot of the debate concerning the upcoming films comes from. For many, this is like waiting for episode 1 all over again. And I caution fans because if you were one of those extremists who camped out in front of a theater for 3 months to see Phantom Menace, only to end up hating it, there's nothing to say that won't happen again. I remember eagerly waiting for Phantom Menace's release. I must have downloaded that teaser trailer 50 times before I actually saw the movie. My first impression was that I genuinely enjoyed it for what it was. I knew that it was a prequel and that it was going to have a different feel than the original films. At the time it was released, it stood on its own because there was still a 2-movie gap leading to the classic trilogy, so I accepted it for what it was. However, I was often confused that so many people hated it. Was I just a die-hard fan that was over-defending the film because of my love for the series? Over the years, I came to terms with the film's many flaws. The underlying story isn't that intriguing, the acting choices weren't exceptionally great, and there are some characters, like Qui-Gon Jinn, that I felt were unnecessary. I thought that the main story should have revolved around Obi-Wan and Anakin. After all, those are the two characters that carry the prequels. Those are the characters that end up having this huge conflict. That being said, I still enjoy Phantom Menace as a fun fantasy film. It really just takes place too early in the saga to compare it to the rest of the movies. Attack of the Clones was the first film in the franchise where I was genuinely disappointed. It's still a better movie than Menace as far as acting and plot go, but I felt it opened up some questionable plot holes, and I'm sorry, but it's hard not to laugh at the dialogue being exchanged between Natalie Portman and Hayden Christensen. The action is where it counts, though, and although it's a flawed movie, it still does a good job of bridging the gap between episodes 1 and 3. Then we have Revenge of the Sith, which is one of my top 3 favorite Star Wars films, the others being Empire and Jedi. Aside from some of the dialogue, the film is near flawless and a fitting end to Lucas's directing career. I thought he did a great job ending the saga on that note. So where do we go from here? A lot of people are excited that Lucas will no longer have any say over the Star Wars franchise, at least in terms of writing or directing. That could be a double-edged sword, though. Whether you despise Lucas as a filmmaker or not, there's a certain feeling you get by watching a Star Wars movie that isn't easily emulated. The only example I can readily give is when you compare the original Star Trek films to J.J. Abrams' reboot. While I love the 2009 Star Trek, it gave the franchise a little pep that is kind of uncharacteristic of the older films. I'm not expecting Disney to go back to using 3D models and puppets, but depending on who they pick to helm these new films will ultimately determine how they come out. The most obvious thing fans are disputing is just how much tampering Disney will do with the franchise. I have just 2 words: the Avengers. Whenever someone disputes Disney's newfound hold on the future of Star Wars, bringing up the Avengers usually deflates the argument. From what I've heard, Disney pretty much lets their acquired companies run amok with their films, while their primary job is to just sit back and reap the rewards. If they allow Lucasfilm to flourish with the Star Wars brand, the franchise should be in pretty good hands. And it isn't as if Lucas is just giving the company to some unknown entity. He has a long history with Disney, and he appointed Kathleen Kennedy as Lucasfilm's president. If you don't know who Kathleen Kennedy is, check out her resume. She's worked on pretty much every major film in Hollywood. Here's my major concern, and maybe a lot of you know where I'm going with this. On top of producing episodes 7, 8, and 9, Disney's long-term plans for the franchise is to make a new Star Wars film every 2 to 3 years. Essentially, it could be like James Bond by the time they're finished. I shudder to think. Right now, there's only 6 films, not including that mediocre Clone Wars animated movie. If you're familiar with the Bond films, some of them are good, most of them are simply average, and some are pretty hard to sit through. As much as I love Star Wars, I'd rather them stop than actually have to sit through a handful of mediocre or even terrible entries in the series. Many would argue that the prequels have done a good job of that, and while I enjoy the prequels, that's not to say that down the road I'm going to enjoy episode 20. The one last thing I have to talk about is just what the stories could be. I'm only talking about episodes 7, 8, and 9, as Disney plans on basing the future films on expanded characters and moving away from the Skywalker family. Whenever Lucas discussed his plans for multiple trilogies, he always said that the first 3 movies would talk about Anakin, the middle 3 talk about Luke and Leia, and the third trilogy, if it ever came to fruition, would be about Luke and Leia's offspring. So no doubt the next 3 movies should have something to do with them. The question everyone has is, from what material will they draw from? Before Lucas did the prequels, there were tons of books that took place after Return of the Jedi. Luke got married, Han and Leia got married, and they all had kids who went off on their own adventures. However, no one ever tampered with the preceding history, the stories about Darth Vader and his past. Lucas didn't have much to compete with when he wrote those scripts, because no one went near that territory. I know Lucas created all these characters, but Star Wars has an immensely large fan base that is undoubtedly familiar with at least some part of the expanded universe. Will Lucasfilm simply ignore the literature, the novels, and comic books, erasing over all of that history and start fresh? Do its own reboot, if you will? Some people don't consider anything beyond the films as canon, but there are many more who would love to see film adaptations of their favorite novels come to life, particularly the Timothy Zahn trilogy. Fans are also concerned that they're going to base the next movies entirely on Luke, Leia, and Han, and have Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and Harrison Ford reprise their roles. I don't see that happening, although I think it would make the most sense to have them return as elders to kind of instruct the newer generation, much like Alec Guinness in the original films. This is a day and age where we've gotten used to older actors coming back to reprise beloved roles. Hell, next year Bruce Willis is returning as John McClane in A Good Day to Die Hard. Yes, that is the title, and yes, that is Die Hard 5. 25 years after the original film, and he's as fit as ever.
The 007 of Plainfield, New Jersey.
We've also seen Sylvester Stallone and Harrison Ford make the same type of comebacks. Some well received, others not so much. Either way, there's no reason to believe this type of thing can't happen. I know there are concerns about having these beloved characters being recast, and that could always be a possibility. It just depends on whether or not it's done well. I thought J.J. Abrams' Star Trek exceeded in this category. Then again, we could get something like Return to Oz, in which none of the returning characters remotely resemble their 1938 counterparts. Of course, this is all fan speculation. Well, I went on longer than I originally intended. Hope this stirs some much-needed conversation and debate, and I'll see some of you in 2015.